I'd like to start this interview by bringing to Daniel and our audience a warm welcome from APGRD. I'm Professor Helene Foley, a semi-retired classics professor from Barnard College, Columbia University, and I have the exciting opportunity to interview Daniel Fish, who is currently directing a performance of Sophocles Elektra at the Duke of York's Theatre. Daniel is somebody who's only, I believe, done two major productions in England, the other one being his well-known experimental Oklahoma. So Daniel, could you just tell us a few things about yourself so that the British audience will have more of a sense of you?
Oh, well, sure. Hi. Thanks, Helen. I'm a director. I work in theater, opera, and kind of across the boundaries of that and new music and film and video as well. Um, and I kind of work all over the place. I mean, I work a fair amount in New York and in the US, but also in Europe, Germany, and very happy to have made this production in London with a kind of international team. Um, so yeah.
Great. Well, that's exciting. So let's get to your production. You told me that you hadn't done much directing of Greek tragedy before. And Electra is an interesting play because it's always been understood correctly as a vehicle for the character Electra, who's the central character and dominates the entire play. Um, and so this is a performative vehicle, not only for Electra as actress in the play, but also for Brie Larson, who is probably known to British audiences in her role as Captain Marvel or in Lessons in Chemistry, especially. Um, this is obviously a sort of collaborative choice between you and Brie to do this production and give her this role, I assume. So could you tell us a little bit about why the two of you were interested in developing this role together?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should also add Bree's performance in a film called Room, which is pretty extraordinary and which is really rather different than um, Captain Marvel, and a performance she, in fact, I think won an Oscar for. And how I really knew her work. Yeah, so about a year ago, maybe a little more, I was talking to James Bierman, producer of the show, about a couple of potential projects, and I asked him if he was familiar with Anne Carson's translations of these Greek plays, and particularly at that time, I was talking about a book of hers called Grief Lessons, which is which are translations of Euripides. And so he said he would look at those translations, and about 3 or 4 months later, he emailed me to ask if I knew Anne's Electra and that he had an actress who might be interested in it. So that led to a conversation between Bree and James and myself where we talked about the play and talked about working together. And um, Bree said yes. And we met in New York, read the play once, just the three of us, just read it through. And then a few months later in September, we did about 5 days of a workshop. Bree, myself, Patrick Vale came in, plays Orestes, and started to build the production gradually from there.
So could you tell us a little bit more about your choices to represent Electra in this particular play and have Brie perform her? For example, I do know that she, through most of the play, had a handheld mic.
Due in no small part to you, Helene. Um, I was interested, I read your article about the importance of sound in the play. And that had sort of keyed into thinking that I already had about the importance of sound, the importance of orality, the importance of the voice, um, as a kind of driving force in the play. So that became very important to me. And I was also reading Anne's introduction where she talks about how many times the character says no, and this idea that in a world where there is really the only possibility for justice or for revenge for a woman in this world is through the noise that she makes, the sounds that come out of her, the words that come out of her, and particularly not just the words, but the sounds. So that kind of led to, in some ways, a very obvious choice, which was to emphasize the sonic elements of the show through microphones and speakers and feedback and a kind of dialogue between the acoustic and the amplified. Um, and we did a little bit of that in a workshop, and then we just, kind of went forward with it. And the whole design, in some ways, kind of grows out of that impulse. But I trained when I went to school at Northwestern University in the Department of Performance Studies, which was formerly the Department of Oral Interpretation. And so the idea of orality and the spoken word and that kind of relation to the text has always been really important to me. And I think Anne's translation is kind of astounding in that, in how alive it is. And the more I worked on it, the more I saw how that stuff was going on. Um,
Could you say a little bit more about the translation? Because
yeah, I think, there's one example that I really love, which is, she's in the scene where Electra and Orestes come together, and which I kind of see as a kind of like in this production, they don't physically touch, right? They come together through the sounds that they're making, through the words that they're building. It's a kind of, they're having a kind of erotic exchange of language. And there's a moment where she says the man is alive, and his response is, as I live and breathe. So you have these like-minded sounds that are kind of shifting and playing off of each other, right? The man is alive as I live and breathe. And it's stuff like that I think the translation is really finely, tuned into. Um, and for me, that was, that's more interesting than the two of them hugging. Um, uh, so yeah.
yeah, and Orestes, I gather, was the only other character who had a mic in the performance. Is that correct? So that brought them together?
Well, he
No.
only uses he uses a handheld mic. He does the old man's speech describing his death on
Mhm.
a microphone. And actually, you're bringing up an interesting point and he is otherwise basically acoustic. But within that scene where they come together, he shifts and his voice, it becomes amplified and sourced from the same speaker that her voice is sourced
Oh,
from. Just really, just as, I think the line that it happens on is um, look at this ring, our father's father, and see what I mean. So sort of, as opposed to there being a physical ring, it's a kind of sonic experience where their two voices are coming through this quite large bank of speakers that are hanging over the center of the stage. Like, whether people notice that or not, I'm not sure, but that was the thought behind it.
I I read in a review, which I will not discuss, that you used a voice distribution machine, which I'm not quite sure what it is. Was that true?
I don't know what a voice distribution machine is either, so I don't know what that critic was referring to. There are various effects. The mics, there's a kind of harmonizer mic that shifts the quality of the voice, and something kind of like a vocoder, and a few places where there's delay and reverb. But I don't know what that critic was talking about.
Okay, well, I certainly don't either. So, it just sounded intriguing. So one of the comments you just made brings me to my next question, which is that you made some very interesting choices in revising the plot in various ways and making different choices for virtually all the characters in some ways. And so
Mhm.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about um, choices you made in terms of revising the plot and what you had in mind.
Could you ask me a specific question around that? And
Okay, well, let's start with the fact that the Pylades and the pedagogue,
uh-huh.
um, who are very important characters in Sophocles, are not um,
Yeah.
play a role in your version, and so I think it would be interesting to talk about that.
Well, the pedagogue essentially does play a role. It's just embodied by the actor who plays Orestes. But it's true that yeah, the first scene of the play, except for the oracle, is cut. So the play begins with Elektra screaming, um, and the only bit of that first scene um, between Orestes and the pedagogue is the oracle where he says, you know, I went to Apollo to ask the oracle how I could get justice for the killers of my father. Um, so yeah, why I did that, it just was what felt right to me. But I do think there's a correction to be made, which I wouldn't say that the pedagogue is cut. I think much of his text is cut, the majority of his text is cut, but the stuff of his that is there is spoken, performed by the actor who plays Orestes.
Yeah, which is very interesting. So tell us more about how that was used in the play with Orestes.
Well, you know, it's a very long speech where Orestes' fake death is described, and I just thought, oh, maybe it would be interesting to have the actor who's playing Orestes read that, perform that speech. I mean, I should say also something you and I talked about in our last conversation, which is like I don't really believe in character. Um, you know, there's language, there's actor, there's time, there's space. There are all these things that we put together, and sometimes people call that character. But the actor is always the actor. He's always who he or she is, and they're interacting or having a conversation with or allowing this language to move through them. Now, an actor might have a different way of thinking about it. They may really have an idea of character, and that's fine. But but that's sort of how I think about it.
And how does that really affect the choices that you make by
Well,
thinking?
I just think everything's up for grabs. Everything's on the table, right?
Mhm.
So as opposed to like me looking at the script, which happens to be right here, and you know, it says find a place here. I don't know, but well, even if it says, you know, old man, colon, you know, or I think what I'm trying to find a good example here. Oh, here's a really good example. The very end of the play, um, uh, Aegisthus, who has not spoken the entire time, although he has been on stage the entire time, um, just before his entrance, there is the line, why not drop a few friendly words in his ear so that his moment of justice may come as a surprise? A line I believe is originally assigned to the chorus. I'm not sure. I'm looking. Hold on. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it.
I should have it here, but I don't.
Yeah, chorus says what chorus space. Why not drop a few friendly words in his ear so his moment of justice may come as a surprise? So I I don't that I think to us to make the choice or the assumption that that means that line is spoken by the chorus is an assumption that ought to be questioned or has the possibility of being questioned. So in our production, that line is actually Aegisthus's line referring to himself, and it's his entrance into the play, right? And so it means if the chorus says, why not drop a few friendly words in his ear so his moment of justice may come as a surprise, it means one thing. If the actor who's playing Aegisthus says that line, there is a different shift to it. There's a kind of irony and a, you know, it takes on another color. So it's those kinds of things that when I say everything's up for grabs, that you know that's what I mean.
Great. What about you've already said some things about the famous recognition engagement between Orestes and
Mhm.
Electra. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about how that scene works and
Yeah,
your
sure. I mean,
famous
no,
things with the vase and other things that
the
people
urn, the
remember?
question of the urn, right? The you know, which
Yes.
people have written books about, uh, and you know, talked. So this is another example of like everything being on the table. Orestes says, we have his remains in a small urn here, for he's dead, as you see. Oh, I look at that and I go, well, what's an urn? Is that an object? Is that a sound? And I just kind of always felt like whenever we tried using a physical object, and I had an urn, I had a bag full of ashes, I had a bag that was the weight of what a human being's ashes would have been. Um, I just thought it was forcing a kind of artifice that I didn't buy. It means the actor has to sort of start doing all this pretending. And I don't really like that very much. Um, so I thought, well, but I knew this was an important moment in the play, right? Like I knew this is like, this thing is really kind of critical. So I thought, well, what if it's not an object, but what if it's something that's sort of more time-based? What if it's an event, right? So we tried various things. At one point, there was a flaming lip song that was played right when he's, have remains in a small urn here, bang, and there was the flaming lip song called "Do You Realize?" And at point, and that kind of worked for a while, but then I thought that was sort of cheating. And then I thought, well, what if the stage just fills with smoke? You know, and um, that would conceal Orestes, conceal Elektra, and then ultimately clear and reveal them. So that's what we do. He says we have his remains in a small urn here, and over the course of really the rest of that scene, the entire stage, and well, depending on the night and the air currents, fills fills with smoke, and eventually clears. Um, and I'm sure there are people who go, well, where's the urn? There's no urn. But
You told me that you were very interested in using speech and silence, and that silence was very important to this production. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah, there's a moment where just before Orestes is going to kill Clytemnestra, Electra says, "My ladies, he is about to accomplish the deed. Be silent and wait." And the production moves very quickly. It's about an hour 12, hour 13 minutes. Um, and it's spoken very quickly. There are very few pauses, and where the pauses are, they are very intentional. So that is a place where there is, I believe, an 18-second silence between when she says be silent and wait, and a bit of audio that comes in of people from a podcast about people looking for their dead relatives in Syria after the Assad regime fell. So that's a place where there's this 18 seconds of just silence and really nothing happening on stage. Another place is Chrysothemis says to Elektra, um, uh, um, "Who are you to who are you to pick up your armor and call me to your side?" So by just taking it's not, I would say it's more of a pause and a silence there, but she's really emphasizing who she is, what she looks like, what her history is, who she is in relation to Electra. So just things like that in relation to the text are ways of setting off certain words. And I think Ants also helps you with this because of where she puts the line endings. And that may be where Sophocles puts the line endings. I'm not, you probably know that better than I, but Clytemnestra has a moment where she says, "But I'll tell you one thing, that murdered girl," end of line, "would speak for me if she had a voice," right? So the logic of the thought is that it would go, that murdered girl would speak for me if she had a voice. But I would think it's a lot more effective if she says, "But I'll tell you one thing, that murdered girl," pause, let that idea hang there, that word girl hang there, and then say, "would speak for me if she had a voice."
I think that's mainly Anne's choices that are coming in there, which is really interesting. Well, we haven't talked too much about the other main characters yet.
Mhm.
So could you tell us, for example, since you were starting to talk about it, the relationship between Chrysothemis and Electra in this version of
Yeah,
the
I mean, I think Chrysothemis is a super interesting character. I think Um, I think she's very strong. I think she's very angry. I think the idea of her being just sort of quiet and submissive and obedient is really simplistic. I think she is choosing that as a way to live and a way to survive. I think she sees Elektra as somewhat entitled in her grieving. So I think there's a real argument between the two of them about two different ways of moving through the world and dealing with violence and dealing with oppression. And I think Chrysothemis makes an incredibly powerful case. And the loss that they both feel when that relationship falls apart in their second scene, um, I think is kind of heartbreaking. Um, uh, so I think, you on the surface, you could look at it, Electra says, how they call you mother's girl. Um, but from the first time I read it, I just thought, no, 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 this is someone who really has, who's really in the fight, and is trying to stay alive, and is very smart about that.
Great. And what about Clytemnestra? Does she give a good chance to make her case?
They all do, I think that's the thing. It's like they're all, I don't think if one gets it right, I hope that a viewer sort of is switching from side to side. Um, um, Clytemnestra absolutely has a case. You know, he murdered he murdered your sister. How could you how could he not be punished? How could you not be angry about that? I also think there's something interesting about Clytemnestra argues in a different way, and particularly in this production with what I think Stockard Channing is doing.
Mhm.
It's, it's the argument of someone who has seen it all, who has lived through it all, who has seen murder and violence generation after generation and lived with it. So it's not as hot. It's more, there's a kind of ease to it. So when she says, anyway, the deed is done, I feel no remorse, and then there's this person opposite her who's so hot and so loud all the time. And I think there's a different kind of power in just saying silence. And so interesting, right? That she says silence.
I
She
know.
doesn't scream silence, right? She just says silence, like she's flicking a piece of a bug off of her shoulder. Sorry, you were going to say something else, and I could cut you off there.
I think critics seem to be very interested in her costume.
In Clytemnestra's costume, or
Yeah.
well, everyone's wearing. I mean, the three members of the Chrysothemis, Clytemnestra, and Aegisthus all wear the same color fur coat. Um, and then they all have these sort of gold or pale gold shifts on underneath. And then throughout the production, they are hit with black paint. Um, um, and there's sort of a sequence where everyone kind of gets hit with this black paint. Um, so maybe that's what people are talking about.
Yeah, interesting. Well, the chorus obviously is also a very important character in this play. And in the original, it's a group of local women who view themselves as citizens and are very concerned with what's going on in the palace and really side with Electra. And so if you could tell us a little bit more about your version of the chorus. And also, we haven't talked at all about the musical elements of this performance, which I think we need to do.
Yeah, well, they are, in fact, a group of local women. They are women who live in London, where the show is being performed. They are a group of women who move and sing together. Um, I think the question of their allegiance or their sympathy is a kind of I find it kind of hard to pin down. I don't, like, to me, I read it and it doesn't seem, sometimes they're like, whoa, that's too far, Elektra, and then sometimes they're like, no, you're right. But I think what's kind of crushing is that, you see these sort of shifting points of view, and then by the time you get to a chorus which we call birds, which begins with why is it we look at birds in the air, we see it makes sense the way they care. That by the end of that very long chorus, which is like a kind of 6-minute a cappella song where they're just singing this, and it's Ted Hearn's music. Ted wrote all of the choral music. They say they call on Elektra to crush the ones who now crush you. So that I think, at that point, they have kind of embraced the idea of revenge and violence. But, the question of whether they're citizens or whether they're local, I just think they're people. And
Do you have the chorus actually describe what's going on in the palace? Or anticipate what's going on in the palace and sing that too?
I mean, they say, look,
That's where they really do seem to be very sympathetic with revenge.
they say, look, I see Aegisthus coming.
Mhm.
But they also say, think again, Elektra. Um, don't you see what you're doing? You make your own pain. They say things like this.
Could you say a little?
You must not clash with people in power. These are all also lines
Mhm.
that they say.
Well, could you say a little bit more about the music? It's probably a little hard to describe, but I'm sure people would be
About music.
interested.
I don't know how to talk about music. I can say that it's all a cappella. It's a combination of group singing and solo singing. Um, for sort of not they're sometimes they sing entirely as a group, sometimes they sing in solo, sometimes they're duets. There's pretty complicated harmony in there. There's 6 extraordinary performers who are on stage all the time, and as is pretty much everybody else except for a period of time, Clytemnestra and Orestes. And they kind of, they and Elektra are kind of the engine of 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 the play.
Mhm. Do the chorus move and dance?
They move. They don't so much dance,
Mhm.
but there's a great deal of choreography that Annie B. Parson did, which has to do with their gestures, their weight, their walking, their lying down, their position in space.
Mhm.
So it's absolutely choreographed, but there's not much dancing and what I think people might
Mhm.
think of when they hear that word.
Now, you said there were a lot of characters who were on the stage for the whole time. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty much everybody's just there. I mean, when the play starts and only Elektra is visible, but pretty quickly the chorus and Aegisthus and the actor playing Orestes and the actor playing Clytemnestra and the actress playing Chrysothemis are all visible. Um, That's just a choice. It means something different to other people. I don't.
Do you have a reason for this, or it just worked?
Yeah, I wouldn't. It's funny with these things, Helen. I'm always a little reluctant because if I say, well, I did this because, then it provides a lens for the viewer to see it through. And then I think that kind of squashes their own point of view, which I shouldn't really have the power to do. Now I realize this may be watched or listened to after the production is closed or by people who won't see it. But again, like it's rare that I know something and make a choice because I know something. It's more like I'm trying to have a conversation with the play, trying to learn stuff, I'm trying to discover stuff about the material. And so you just make choices and then kind of see how they work. And and then maybe after watching it repeatedly, I go, oh, that's what that's about. But it's sort of it's kind of the inverse of what you might think would be the way
What
to
did
go.
you learn from the actors through the rehearsal process?
You learn different things from you learn different things from different people. I mean, I think Stockard, I learned a lot about the ease with which that character could argue. Um, um, I'm not sure, it's hard to point to. It's more like it's less that there's like a specific thing, oh, I learned this from this person, than it is like it's a kind of group investigation of this material, and we're all in the room with it, and we're all wrestling with it, and we're all saying, okay, what happens when we say this in this moment? Um, so it's kind of more like that.
What about the set,
That
and the lighting and all that stuff?
Yeah, the set consists of, it's pretty minimal. It consists of a cyc that flies in and out. It consists of a revolve um, that's the size of most of the stage, that's turning most of the time. And again, that's another place where the moments where the revolve stops are poignant. Um, uh, and then there is this sort of machine that sprays paint. Um, and that's really it in terms of the design. The site does get covered in paint at one point, and the paint sort of runs down in black lines by the end. Um, but again, and then there are these speakers and the sound equipment that are practical elements, but also scenic elements. And hopefully, it's a way of really emphasizing the performances and emphasizing the sonic nature of it. And it was a deliberate choice to not, for me, it's happening now, it's happening in the moment, but it's not a production that's set in an apartment, or in the prime minister's office or something like that. That is just like, that's not interesting to me right now. There are clothes that are contemporary. I mean, all the clothes are contemporary. They were made now. Some of them, some people might see as having a kind of classical or Greek shape or cut to them, which I think is interesting. But Brie also wears a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. Um, and
Buzz cut, I gather.
and her head is shaved.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Some critics mentioned something that looked like a blimp or an
Yeah,
airplane
there's a blimp.
top of the set.
There's a blimp. I can't tell you what the blimp means. I'm not, there's a blimp. It lights up sometimes. It's an object in the space. Um, uh, it's going to mean different things to different people, and some people probably have no idea what it means. Some people might find it very arbitrary. Um, I like it, and I think it's kind of interesting.
We haven't talked about Odysseus.
Mm.
Can you say something about your interpretation of him?
Greg Hicks plays Aegisthus. He's on stage the entire time, which I think is a real challenge because he sits there for, an hour and 10 minutes before he speaks. And then when he comes on, there's this audio that both of the deaths, both of the murders, the murder of Clytemnestra and the revelation of her corpse and the murder of Aegisthus, are in a sense represented by this audio about the prisons in Syria. So he comes on and he hears this, and I think Greg's kind of extraordinary, and in the way he listens to it and the way that his language around it is kind of both responsive both to what Orestes and Elektra are saying and also this audio. I mean, he has this line that feels to me it's like out of a Beckett play. I'm a dead man, no way out. It's so great. uh, and I
So
think
all of it, as in the original play, all of the physical violence is off stage.
all of the physical violence is off stage. Yeah. Um,
Tell
yeah.
us more about the podcast. Why did you choose the podcast?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I was trying to find, well, it grew out of an impulse to basically go, how do we deal with these moments? Um, um, these moments where we're hearing these sort of screams, which in Anne's translation are phonetically spelling out the Greek, some of which we do, some of which we cut. So we began by putting them in by just every time there was one of those screens in that particular sequence, putting in this audio. And the audio was just something I heard while I was coming to rehearsal one day. Um, uh, and we tried it and worked with it a lot and tried to find the right balance, the right tone for acting around it. And it felt right. And
Could
I'm
you
not,
tell us a little bit more about what was in the podcast?
yeah, you're hearing a reporter describe people in Syria looking for their relatives and describing what they see in these prisons that have been open. So you're seeing in some of the cases it's descriptions of dead bodies, the appearance of the bodies, um, what's happened to them. Um, that's basically it. Yeah.
There have been, as you probably know, there have been a lot of discussions about the end of the play, that is Sophocles' original, and where the audience is really left in terms of issues relating to justice and revenge and the future of the characters. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about, for example, just to be a little clearer, Orestes doesn't receive any kind of retribution in Sophocles' version of the play, as opposed to other versions of the Orestes story where he ends up being punished for his crimes. And people have also sort of wondered what's really going to happen to Elektra after this incredible, intense experience that she's having, and where is she really left when the play ends? And I wondered how you were dealing with those issues.
Um, well, I mean, ultimately, those issues are issues for the audience to decide, for an
Yeah.
individual member of the audience to describe. Um, Brie does stand down center stage. She stops speaking before the end of the play, about a page and a half before the end of the play. She is silent. She has Aegisthus has this line, "Let me just say," and she cuts off that line with a scream of the word "no," which she screams and holds. I think like Brie was just telling me today that she holds it for like 20 seconds. Um, uh, and Then she has a few more lines where she says, nothing else, kill him at once, nothing else, nothing less than this can cut the knot of evils inside of me. And then she's silent. She doesn't leave. She stands center stage. In some productions, I guess the stage direction has Orestes and Elektra going off together. But we're sort of looking at everyone through the last chorus of the play. Everybody is on stage. The revolve is going. She's all the way downstage, facing front. and going through whatever she is going through. And it's pretty brightly lit. Because her head is shaved, her face is very open. So there's a kind of vulnerability there. Um, um, and I think one of the sort of kind of most painful lines in the play is just before that. She says, I've learned to side with the winners, which I think is just a kind of damning and painful and sad thing for her to say.
Yeah, I would agree with. And Orestes goes off stage as he does in the original.
No, everybody's on.
Oh, everyone's on.
Everybody's on.
So do you have Clytemnestra and Odysseus being killed on stage?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, Clytemnestra is on stage at the moment where her death is supposed to happen, but her death is not depicted in any representational way. She does, so this is again, so there's that little bit of audio, and and Clytemnestra's line is again, right? So, and I think in the play, it's in response to her being wounded a second time. But here it's both that and a response to this audio of sort of perpetuation of violence.
And Odysseus?
Even that, just, I mean, again, I go back to the strength of Anne's translation, which is for her to just say the word again. I mean, it's just, and to not necessarily know exactly literally what she's referring to, but you just think about that word again in the context of this play, in the context of the arguments of the play. It takes on a real power. And I think when Stockard found it, she was struggling with finding it, and then she found it really by just changing the inflection. And she's like, I'm gonna try it. And I was like, that's it. We'd been trying to find it. It's just this one little word. It kept doing different ways, and I kept trying to give her a note on it. And then she just tries. So she said, I was thinking about it. I'm just gonna try saying it with a different inflection. And I was, oh, well, that's it. There it is.
Oh. So what else do you think you would like to share with our listeners about your experience with directing this play?
It's hard. It's a lot of fun.
What was fun about it?
I mean, it's great language. People are singing. They're wonderful actors. I think that's part of it's exciting if we get it right, and there's a fun to that. It's also brutal. Um, um, but hopefully it's not taking itself overly earnestly or overly seriously, and it's really just a kind of bunch of people wrestling with this language and this story in time before us, and we as an audience get to be there, and the actors get to have an audience for that, and I think that's kind of cool.
Well, I certainly do too. So I think we've talked a lot about the major aspects of your production. And so I think I'd like to close by simply encouraging those who hear this to attend the production while it's still on.
April
How
12th.
long is it going on? April 12th.
April 12th at the Duke of York Theater. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel. It was really great to talk to you about.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Bye.